Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on first Monday after the holidays. Thank you so much to Louis, to Clara, Sarah, and the entire Site Santa Fe team for inviting me here. I've had a wonderful time the last few days here in Santa Fe. This is my second trip here. I was here briefly in 2015 working with Linda Benglis on a project, but I was mostly in the studio, so this is an exciting time to be here. And as I kind of transition into this project where I'm going to talk about a lot of the places and experiences that have formed how I work with artists and how I work with kind of developing new audiences for contemporary art and expanding mind views about the places that people think about when it comes to art. An interesting anecdote is for the last 2 years, I was working in Bukhara, Uzbekistan. And for a lot of the artisans in Uzbekistan, the equivalent to them of showing at Documenta is showing in Santa Fe at the International Folk Market. So when people want to speak to me about like how important they are in the world, Santa Fe would come up. So when I got the call from Louis, it was so uncanny to be linking Santa Fe and Bukhara. So here on this map, there's a bunch of places that I spend time and that are important and are interconnected in different ways. My mother's family comes from Guam, which is this small island here in Micronesia. I spent a lot of time there growing up, and I'm spending a lot more time there now. And something that I think is interesting about this place is that my great-grandmother was subject of Spain, Japan, and the US without ever having moved. And it's also a place that when I went to high school in Los Angeles, people thought I was making up as a story. So, kind of growing up in a place where you have to explain a place that's so complex globally, that a place that seems so small, but when you think about its global impact is quite large. So I think a lot of life has been rescaling place and our relationship to place. Normally, when I talk about the Philippines, I'll just say that I lived in the Philippines for 2 years. But interestingly, for people in Santa Fe, I lived in Bataan for 2 years. So it was also uncanny to be in the military museum today, which had Bataan labels on the door. I'll talk a little bit about that project in a bit. But anyway, these different nodes of places, I moved to South Asia when I was quite young. So most of my exhibition making experience has been outside of the US. But the first slide I'll show is maybe some of you might have seen my Desert X 2023 exhibition. I curated Desert X because my parents still live in Los Angeles, and I wanted them to see something that I worked on. And so this is an installation that I am very proud of by a Bangladeshi artist named Rana Begum. Rana and I have worked together for a long time. I'll show some other slides. But what I thought was really important and incredible was that via the app of Desert X, it was actually the most popular artwork. So it was a place where people spent the most time. It was the place that people wanted to read more about. And I think it's wonderful that it was a work by a Bangladeshi woman. So I don't think that, I think it's wonderful to give artists opportunities to shine in new contexts, and the way that they work changes on the different contexts in which they're working. So this is an image of Rana's work in 2023. Rana makes a lot of works with powder-coated aluminum. So this is just powder-coated aluminum chain link fence that was fabricated to create this labyrinth. But when we first worked together in Bangladesh in 2013, we hit a little bit of a challenge because you can't actually get metal easily in Bangladesh. It's a country that is mostly clay. You have very, very high import taxes on foreign materials, and it was important to us. So I'll tell you a bit about the project in a bit, but it was important to us to work with diaspora Bangladeshi artists such as Rana, but we didn't have the materials with which she would be able to work. So to back up a little bit, this project in Bangladesh, the Dhaka Art Summit, is a non-commercial exhibition and research platform that happens every 2 years in the capital of the country, Dhaka. It was founded by a young collector couple named Nadia and Rajib Samdani, and they founded this because when they were traveling around the world, they saw that Bangladeshi artists were absent from biennales, museum shows, art fairs, and that's because people couldn't access the work. Like artists didn't have websites, they didn't have studios, because there's no commercial system, people weren't visiting there to learn about the artists. So rather than sponsoring a few Bangladeshi artists to go outside, they wanted to create an event that would bring the world to the country to learn about art in its context. So that started in 2012. They kind of organized the first edition in 3 months. It was all local artists. And when I came in soon after, we wanted to create an international event. So we invited Rana. We didn't really know like how to work with someone who makes large-scale metal works in a country with no metal. And we started speaking and we realized that the work is actually about light. It's not really about the medium. So here, what's really important about the work is how the light is filtering through the chain link fence. So when she came to Bangladesh, she became interested in baskets because she was remembering these memories of basket weavers from when she grew up. She left Bangladesh when she was 7 to move to London. And so we worked on this piece, which is made out of 1,200 handmade baskets. And what's so beautiful is the way the light would shine through this and change across the day. And suddenly people started seeing her work differently. It was a shift in the practice that came through really spending time in a place. And I'll come back to this later, but I really have a deep love of working with makers and working with people who make things. But I think there's a real inequity with how the people who think and how the people who make things are credited. Here is another image. So this is fast forward. This is Dhaka Art Summit 2023. And this is a beautiful performative project by a South African female architect named Sumaya Valley. Some of you may have seen her Serpentine Pavilion, I believe was in 2021. So this was a beautiful pavilion that was made out of handmade pots. Some of them were fired and some of them were unfired. And in the evening, women would start, or performers would start washing the pots, so some of them would start disintegrating. And also on the side, musicians would start playing the pots so it sounded like thunder. This piece was very, very critically successful. The image kind of circulated everywhere. Visitors loved it. And I wanted to show this in Desert X, but then we found out that something that costs $20,000 to do in Bangladesh would have cost around $400,000 to do in California, just because of the difference in labor, materials, transport. And so I think this is also an interesting lesson that like you have to curate for where you're at. Like, you know, also to make that basket piece, it's pretty impossible to do that. You know, in Bangladesh, all the basket makers are fairly paid, but to make a piece like that production-wise would be probably in a similar range to this piece. So it's this kind of lesson about rather than lamenting that you don't have metal or lamenting what you don't have, build with what you do have. But again, a lesson learned here, all of the rather than referring to people as ceramic makers, all the people who made these pots had a name and had an identity. This is a beautiful picture of like the same performance, but from the top of the building where we work. So the Dhaka Art Summit takes over an existing government building. It's called the Bangladesh Shilpa Kala Academy. Normally it's a pretty sleepy building, but every 2 years it becomes this very dynamic space for art, architecture, talks, performances. In our 6th edition, we had 600,000 people, a little under 600,000 people in 9 days. So statistically, we're the highest daily visited art show. And most of our visitors had never been to a contemporary art museum before, but they're very engaged. And we'll talk a little bit about building that audience over time. So also I've mentioned a bit about my discomfort with how makers and thinkers are credited. And part of that stemmed from this piece, which I was really proud to be the kind of inaugural curator and commissioner of. So this is a piece that kind of went viral by an artist named Paul Pfeiffer, who many of you might be familiar with. And so Paul is of Filipino origin, and he did a residency with me in Bataan. So for 2 years, from 2016 till 2018, in parallel to my work in Bangladesh, I ran a foundation called Belias Artist Projects that would invite artists to live with a community of artisans in Bataan and make work together. And so we had wood makers, tile makers, like basically any kind of craft you could think of. And the father of the patron of this project, Jam Acuzar, collects colonial Filipino houses the way people collect art. So he'll find these like old wood houses, including Enrique Iglesias' grandmother's house, takes them apart like puzzles, restores them and rebuilds them on this beach in Bataan. And he has a community of artisans that are there restoring all the properties. And so he wanted his daughter to move back to the Philippines, and she wanted to work in art. So the deal was that she could do art things. It was a wild and amazing adventure. So Paul wanted to do this project, and he was inspired by the figure of Justin Bieber, who he saw as this kind of child king. And this was around the time where that song Despacito was viral around the world. And so he found a video on YouTube where he saw Bangladeshi teenagers singing the song Despacito, and they have no idea what they're saying. If you speak Spanish, the lyrics are quite lewd. And he was thinking about also that movement of the Catholic Church, when people were having to say things in Latin, they didn't know what they were talking about, this kind of creation of a child king. And also, I don't know if any of you know this, but Justin Bieber is a born-again Christian. So if you look at his tattoos, they're all things from the Bible. So they say Son of God. So Paul wanted to work with the saint maker. The saint maker has a name. His name is Willy Lyog, and he is an exceptional saint maker. So he makes some of the best saints that are found in churches across the Philippines. There is a technique that comes from Spain, which is called incarnation, which is how you add flesh through paint to wood. And so this series is called Incarnator. Willy and Paul worked very hard on this together. When we showed this in the Philippines, it was always clear that this was a collaboration with Willy Lyog. But the minute that this started circulating in Palazzo Grassi, LA Mocha, and other places, Willy's name goes away and it just becomes an anonymous saint maker. And that's not Paul's fault. That is totally not Paul's fault. Paul is always crediting Willy, but it's just the way the art world works. Like, Willy is not important in the kind of art world equation when we think about galleries or these certain hierarchies with how we think about artists. And this was something that I really wanted to do something about, but I didn't really know how. Fast forward, so I'm kind of talking through different mistakes or things I learned, and it'll lead somewhere. So we're jumping back to Bangladesh, and this is an image of a project that I realized with Rakib Shah. So this was Rakib Shah's first big project in South Asia. So he comes from Kashmir, spent time in India, and had to leave due to religious violence, and was living in exile in London. And his family were antique dealers. So the idea, this is a project I co-curated with Maria Balshaw, who's now the director of Tate. We wanted to kind of contextualize Rakib Shah's paintings, which are basically looking at old master paintings, but inserting his own story of exile and longing for Kashmir with decorative objects that were also in exile. We had received a grant from the British Council and the Arts Council of England to do this project, but we had to basically create Western museum conditions inside Bangladesh, which some of you might know is one of the rainiest. It's a very difficult country when it comes to climate. So we had to create Western museum conditions, and we did. And everyone was super proud. But in the end of it, when I looked at the cost of that, and I started thinking that artists in that region don't make work, they don't even have air conditioning. So if they're not making work in this kind of environment, why are we curating things like this that are not actually actively contributing to building a local art scene? I wanted to completely change the way we worked. And I think it took actually doing this to be able to change that. There are other things here, like Bangladesh doesn't have art insurance. Each one of these paintings is over £1 million. So how do you do that? You partner with galleries who have international insurance for all their art fairs, and you basically create partnerships to create the systems that allow these projects to happen. So Bangladesh is a country that is not wealthy. This couple, they have money, but they're not they're not billionaires. The way that we do this project, it's a very bottom-up project, but it's people want to make this happen. Artists want people in Bangladesh to see their work, and we kind of partnership and community build to make these things happen. Next slide. So this is another example of how partnerships can work. This was the same summit. This is a performance by a Bangladeshi artist named Ritu Sattar, which is called Last Tune. And here you have different musicians who are sitting on scaffolding at the entrance of the building. So when you come into the exhibition, you're walking in through that white curtain behind these 4 flute players. And they're playing droning sounds in protest to the rising fundamentalism that is removing music education from school. And we could afford to do these performances, but the Liverpool Biennial could not. The Liverpool Biennial could afford to make a film, but we could not. So we partnered together where we realized the performance, the Liverpool Biennial commissioned the film, and we were able to make a work that lived in a very live way in Dhaka, but is still circulating. What I was also very proud of is that MoMA invited this work, so it has to be rescheduled because it was during the pandemic. But it was a beautiful example with an artist that doesn't have a gallery, that's never sold an artwork, can make a work that's so powerful that they can enter the kind of highest levels of international museum discourse. So we also tried to do, because as I've mentioned, we don't have huge budgets in Bangladesh, is try to find kind of pockets of money to, rather than putting it into the exhibition design, put it into the artworks. So this image is a rather extreme image, but when you saw those, that Rakib Shah room, basically we were building false walls. So between all these columns, you'll get a better sense of the building in future slides. We were building all of these rooms to try to create a space that looked like a Western museum space. And we decided to actually change that and get really creative by working with designers, architects to basically think about unmaking the exhibition at the same time as we were making the exhibition. So thinking about, okay, what's the carbon footprint of all these walls? What's the carbon footprint of the AC? Like, thinking of all of this before you actually do something. So what we did here is this is a massive cinema banner painting that's looking at timelines of Afro-Asia solidarity movements. And it's painted by cinema banner painters. And it's basically the red poles are rented scaffolding from construction sites that are painted. And the canvas is a wall, so there's things hung on the back side, but in the end, it's an artwork. So basically, at the end, you just return the poles to the construction site, and you have a painting. And you're not actually spending money on fake walls and things like that. So you'll see in Bukhara, I kind of keep this strategy with most of the shows I work on. The same situation, this is a very different budget sort of project, but same edition of the summit. This is 2020. This is Adrián Villar-Rojas, who's one of my favorite artists from Argentina. And the artwork becomes part of like the infrastructure of the building. So what you're seeing here is a floor piece that he made using 400 million-year-old fossils from before Pangaea. The title of the exhibition was called Seismic Movements. It was looking how people shift the face of the planet through social movements, feminist movements, political movements, but also how movements of the Earth's plates entirely changed. But here what you see, the artwork is the floor, the sculpture is the entrance to the space. Like, we're thinking with the artists about the space rather than changing the space for the artwork. This was also, so basically this is the exact same space where Rakib Shah's work was. And this is a project that I worked on with Anthony Gormley in Dhaka Art Summit 2023. So Anthony and I became friends during the pandemic because his gallery in Belgium asked me if I would interview him. And like, Anthony's work was not really the kind of work I was working with as a curator, but something totally fascinated me in the interview, which is that he studied meditation in India before he went to art school. So he spent about 4 years in South Asia. And when you see that, you actually see that all of these bodies are actually him trying to find that inner infinite space of connection. And he hadn't had the opportunity to do a major project in South Asia. And he also wanted to kind of tell people or give credit to the region of that intense and amazing experience in his life. And so I also told him that we were not going to be shipping things from, so I also try to ship as little as possible, that we weren't going to be shipping things from London to Bangladesh. And if he wanted to do something, he had to do something with Bangladeshi people that would leave no trace. And so what we ended up was this beautiful piece called Turn. And it's a 2.5 kilometer line of woven bamboo. So he worked with bamboo artisans in Bangladesh to make this. Here you see kids running through it like a vortex. And the entire piece got recycled after. And he made these beautiful friendships with the artisans. And it kind of started a new turn in the work. And what I think is interesting as a curator, so I'm a curator that works more with artists than I work with artworks. I mostly work with artworks that don't exist before the exhibition. But it's part of this kind of lifelong journey of changing with an artist as you encounter new contexts and watching these experiences cumulatively contribute to the growth of a practice. So here, as you can see, this actually was one of our least expensive artworks in the entire summit. And so, there's very different ways to think about monumentality and impact. And in the past, this would have been a room with, temperature controlled, pumped through with AC. But what we started looking at museum spaces in Brazil and other parts of the world where we actually understood having an open plaza is a very beautiful thing that a lot of people would be dying to have. But when you're trying to think about Western museum conditions, you get stuck. It's more about changing one's framework. So here's an artist, Curator, who many of you know from this beautiful project he did here for SITE. So this was a performance he did in Dhaka Art Summit 2020. So by removing the costs of all those walls and all these things, I had the money to do a meaningful performance with Curator. And what he said for him was very meaningful was that he didn't speak the same language as the performers, but they were actually able to see what ritual means when you're speaking through body or nonverbal communication. So I also realized that putting money into people is really important because it can change their life. And one of my friends is the late curator Koyo Kuo, who would have been curating Venice, and she always said that people are more important than things. And so we also started putting more attention and funds into performance. And this is a performance that we commissioned by a Bangladeshi artist named Yasmin Jahan Nupur, and it's called Let Me Get You a Nice Cup of Tea. And it's unpacking the kind of very violent stories of how, you know, this very polite act of having tea is constructed, right? So if you look at the Boston Tea Party or the Opium Wars, like tea is not a neutral, it's not a neutral material. But what was wonderful is Tate actually ended up acquiring this work and showing it, you know, so basically this is the first Bangladeshi artist that has been exhibited at Tate, and it's exhibited as a performance work. So while we're a festival, like the Dhaka Art Summit is only a 9-day long show, and that's just because we can't afford to keep it on longer. It has ripple effects because the works start circulating in other places. And it's very much about it's wonderful to have Anthony Gormley there, but it's actually about building up the opportunities for the local artists. Here's another piece that I'm really proud of. This was a performance in Dhaka Art Summit 2023 by a Belgian performance artist. She's mostly in theater, named Meet Warlap. And so Meet wanted to make a dancing, singing sculpture, and she ended up writing a rap song with Bangladeshi performers who are basically, what you're seeing are these Bangla words that get repeated to make a beat, but they're poured plaster that across the performance become these words that get stacked up. Here you can see a bit more of what that looked like. You can also see our crazy audiences here. But what's amazing is this is the basis of the Belgian pavilion in Venice that's coming up. And this is an artist, again, has no gallery, shows in theater. It was an open call to the Belgian Cultural Ministry, but the piece is so strong that this got selected. So Bangladesh and these people become inscribed in a story that becomes global. This is a work by an indigenous artist from Bangladesh named Joydeb Rawaja. So, you know, of course, there's indigenous people all over the world. And Joydeb comes from one of the most militarized places on the planet, which is the Chittagong Hill Tracts. And it's very militarized. It's very hard to go there because they don't want you to see it. And Joydeb didn't like that his children were growing up totally terrified of all the military everywhere. So he started making drawings where the military would become toy soldiers and like the indigenous people would become huge. And there's a very, very sad but very real story about how, this is before Bangladesh was Bangladesh, when it was colonized by Pakistan, they built a hydroelectric dam that flooded the area where the palace of the Chakma king lives. So basically that community knows that their king's palace is underwater, and it's a very traumatic image. But here, he has imagined his community lifting the palace out of the water. You see these floating fish, and you see these little soldiers at the bottom of the lake. So if a place is very militarized, it's actually hard to write about. But actually, even the US ambassador was shocked that I was able to have this as the opening piece that you entered this exhibition. But it looks like toys, right? So a lot of my exhibitions are very political, but you just have to look for it. Like, it's not trying to spark something that will shut down a conversation. It's trying to start something that will open up a conversation. And art and the space of imagination is a place where these things can happen, which is very different than writing in a newspaper. So what's also wonderful here is that this work got acquired by the Guggenheim, and the artist has a gallery and has now built a studio that's supporting the entire community. So these are these kind of opportunities where someone who's talented just needs the right framing to be able to connect, because this story that's happening in Bangladesh is the same thing that's happening with my people in Guam. So this is not a unique story, it's one that the world needs to see and connect to. Here we have another image. So this is a Bangladeshi artist named Ashfika Rahman, and this was a commission for the 2023 Dhaka Art Summit called Behula Today. And I don't know if everyone knows this, but climate or violence is gendered in climate change, right? So in floods, like more women die than men because a lot of them are scared to leave the house. There's a lot of also sexual violence that happens in flood zones because police can't go there. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but Ashfika went and met a lot of people from these floodplain regions, and women wrote letters that are unpacking a myth about a woman named Behula who basically floated down the river following her husband, trying to bring him back to life after he was bitten by a snake. It's actually a quite sexist story, so she was working with them to kind of think through, why do we revere this figure and what does this mean today? So this piece also just won the Future Generation Art Prize, which is like kind of the top art prize for young artists. She just got 100,000 euros that is supporting her community. So basically, the point is artists can be very talented. They just need the right kind of curatorial and community support to shine. And also global opportunities, because the opportunities in Bangladesh are quite limited. It needs to have a global dialogue for these artists to be able to grow. This is just an image again. You're seeing kind of what the space looks like. This is a work by Hawaii-born artist of Bengali origin named Basha Chakravarti. So what's also important to me is that for every very famous artist like Anthony Gormley, an unknown artist needs an equal space. So we try to commission huge projects by emerging artists. And again, like you have to make your stakeholders happy. And so luckily, having these very famous artists also makes people more excited, or, people that I work with more excited to support the younger artists as well. Here you see what it looks like animated with people. We have a very, very engaged audience of all ages. So we have lots of kids, we have lots of adults, old people, and I love this image on the right. So this was a show that I co-curated. I love co-curating also, with an Indian curator named Akansha Rastogi. And the show was called Very Small Feelings. And it was a show that was made for your inner child. So it was trying to like bridge that gap between children and our inner child, but also to look critically at the stories that we're taught as children, because a lot of them, if you look at them, are not so okay. But what I love about this piece, so it's called Jump. So these are two works. One is by a modernist Bengali artist named Binod Bihari Mukherjee. We just saw some of his work in the Tia collection yesterday. But Binod Bihari Mukherjee went blind in his older age, but he was making collages when he was blind, and they're really exceptional. And the work with the trampolines is a work by a Turkish artist named Ahmet Ogut, and it's called Jump Up. And so basically you hang artworks too high, so like a kid you have to jump up to see them. But he also was making fun at what does this eye level mean, whose eye level, and people just love this. But this kind of plays between what people can see. So it was a very playful show. Very well received. It also traveled to India. So we also want a lot of our shows to travel. And what's also beautiful is we have, most of our audience is local. Bangladesh is not a place you go as a tourist. And we don't fly, institutions have their own budgets to travel, but we have, museum directors from most museums coming on their own expense to see this show, just because you'll see something here that you won't see somewhere else. And everything is free. There's no VIP hours. And so there's no moment where you're not going to be in a show with Bangladeshis. And it's really beautiful to see. Someone once said, which I loved, is that the art world comes to Dhaka and they become people again. And part of the way they become people again is my amazing team of art mediators. So here you see this large group of young people. So they're not only there reading a script about the artworks, they're actually working with the artists to make the artworks, and they're working with me in the curatorial process. So before, we had people that we would call volunteers, and we had a call with some of them, and they're like, hey, we work the hardest and we carry your show. Why do we not have any input in what you're thinking about? And I'm like, actually, that's a really fair comment. So actually, when I come up with the curatorial idea, I share it with them very early and get their feedback, and they live there, and they're young people from that culture. And so that is something I took with me to Bukhara, and it really made all of the difference, because people become active participators in the creation of art. Their families get excited. It's something that's very different than just kind of hiring people from within the art world already. And they also see things from different perspectives. So I'm also giving a shout out to my friend Neha, who's here. So this is a project from 2017 to 2018, which is called Every Kind of Sun. So every day a child would draw a sun and a different adult would come to read into what that sun was. So we had a meteorologist, we had a psychologist, we had actors, fashion designers, because there's a lot of psychology in how kids create suns. But the works don't just stop at this. So this piece, which people saw live in Dhaka, became part of a work that was later part of Made in LA and has traveled and transformed into different forms. So I think, this is really important to me, is that any artist I invite into my exhibitions, I want, if they're showing new work, is that I want it to be something, an experience that will change how they see the world and not just be about that one moment in that one particular exhibition in that one period of time. I like to think really long term. So this leads to Bukhara. So I got the call to curate the first biennial in Uzbekistan just after an extremely intense year where I had curated Desert X, Dhaka Art Summit, that toured to different countries, a big show in Brazil, a show in Indonesia. So when September 2023 came, I said, I'm done. Like, I'm gonna take a break. I'm not gonna curate anything until the next Dhaka Art Summit. And then this call from Uzbekistan came. And I said no, I think 2 or 3 times. And finally, I kind of had to say yes because of that story I told you about my uncomfortable feeling about how artisans and artists have this hierarchy. And Uzbekistan has magnificent craft, like some of the best living craft traditions I've seen anywhere. And because it's the first biennial, I could actually set up the infrastructure like within the contracts for how artisans would be credited. I could set up from the beginning how people are paid. I could actually like infrastructurally try to fix the problem that I saw within the wider art world. And so I decided to go for this adventure, even though I really wanted to stay home. I wasn't home very much the last 2 years, but I'm really proud with what emerged from here. So the title of this first Bukhara Biennial is Recipes for Broken Hearts. And I was telling Louis that the theme and the title came very fast, which doesn't normally happen. And it happened just because I had these kind of concerns that were sitting with me for a while. One thing is that I had shown you like my map at the beginning with all these different places. One thing that could link all those places is that they're all rice cultures. So if you start looking at the world through rice, suddenly like Brazil, West Africa, Guam, like you would have countries that are not the same as a geographic region starting to come together. And sociologically and anthropologically, rice cultures and wheat cultures are different. And when I started looking up Uzbekistan, I was surprised that the national dish in a desert context was a rice dish. The uncontested national dish of Uzbekistan is called plov. And there is a myth, you'll see pictures of plov in a bit, but there's a myth that plov was invented by Ibn Sina, who the West knows as Avicenna. He's the kind of father of modern medicine from the 11th century in Uzbekistan. So the Gutenberg press, his treatises on medicine are the most printed book after the Bible. The myth is that he invented plov as the recipe to cure the broken heart of a prince who could not marry the daughter of a craftsman. And everything I needed was in that sentence. So one was someone, and again, this the world was very heartbroken in 2024 when I received this phone call. It's still very heartbroken. But this idea that someone would use their creative talents to create something to heal someone else was very beautiful to me. This story of craftspeople getting the short end of the stick was something I didn't like, right? So also, why is the woman that's part of that story is just the father of her, or daughter of her father? She doesn't have a name. She probably didn't get to eat plov. How could we actually, take that idea and create this kind of giant communal feast where we could heal each other from the very massive and different types of heartbreaks that we feel in the world? So the show was extremely well reviewed. So top 10 shows of the year, redefine what biennials can be. I was not expecting that, but it has really, really great reviews. But also we had 1.8 million visitors in 10 weeks. 800,000 were international, the rest were local. Bukhara is a place with very few decent hotels. It's very hard to get to. And it's a new biennial. So to have those, also the local numbers are huge, right, for something that's new. And people were very engaged, and it contributed 210 million euros to the tourism industry. So it really also transformed the kind of local economy, and it had a really big local impact. So that was a great success, and I'll take you through some of the projects, and you can see a little bit about how this adventure worked. So from Dhaka Art Summit, I didn't want to spend money on, kind of signage that's interfering with heritage sites. I should share that all of our sites in Bukhara were heritage sites. So they're old, like Silk Road caravanserais, so kind of motels where people would go through during the Silk Road. They were madrasas, so schools. There were all different kinds of Silk Road sites that actually are not meant for more than 2 or 3 people to be in a room at the same time. So most of the works were outside. And when you entered the exhibition, I wanted you to feel that you were in a new world through kind of relationality rather than through signage. So a good friend of mine who's an architect built a spice market. So basically these are cones that are made up of spices, so they actually smell. And so it was also amazing to see blind people walking through here because they could also understand the architecture in a different way. And we found vendors from the market and gave them spaces where they could sell spices, nuts. They could, we've kind of created our own sort of bazaar. So if you have a title like Recipes for Broken Hearts, something like this is perfect. Then you encounter this insane work by Subodh Gupta. So Subodh Gupta is an artist from India. He's from Bihar, which is a place where a lot of migrant workers come from, and they travel with their recipes and their pots. So if you see his work, it's mostly with these stainless steel pots that are talking about cooking and migration. The Mughal Empire were people from Uzbekistan. So Uzbek or Indian food has a lot of influence from Uzbekistan, but people don't necessarily know that. So samosas come from samsas. There's a lot of these links. So Subodh is also a cook. He loves to cook in his studio, and we created this beautiful sculpture. So on the outside, we have thousands of industrial enamel Soviet-era pots. On the inside, we have these e-cut plates. So they're handmade, but these are industrially handmade for tourists. These are like super mass produced. And maybe that's like the way people look at turquoise jewelry here. It takes time to be able to see what is good and what is made for the tourist market. So these plates, when I first went to Uzbekistan, I was buying a lot of them. Now I wouldn't touch them. And then the special plate. So you see Subodh holding this very beautiful blue plate. He worked with an artist named Bakhtiar Nazirov to create these beautiful terracotta plates with this stunning blue glaze inside that are inspired by Indian plates, thalis. And he made a menu that was basically inspired by these connections between South and Central Asia that people could go and eat and spend time in. Here you see what this exhibition looked like at night. So look, this is just full of people. This, though the smoke is not fog machines, that is smoke coming from plov. So we basically had these plov competitions where we had Uzbek chefs basically cooking plovs from all the different regions of Uzbekistan, and we had free food parties outside. And basically it was lots of teenagers that were dancing with DJs, and these were like some of the best parties I went to, and they're from 6 to 9 p.m. with no alcohol, but a lot of joy. So we really wanted this to be like a participatory, a live exhibition, this idea of like, at the end of something hard, we have a celebration. So that's what we wanted it to feel like, a celebration. We also, Dhaka Art Summit style really wanted to launch Uzbek artists, in particular Bukharian artists, because Bukhara is not, like the art schools are in Tashkent, they're not in Bukhara. We wanted to kind of do something to, give them international visibility and experience. So this is an Uzbek artist named Oyjan, and she's self-taught. She didn't go to art school. And she was making these digital collages. So the work was actually just stuff I saw on Instagram, where she would take elements of mosaics in Samarkand, but manipulate them to be different organs. And she went through a really deep period of depression, which of course, many of us, this mind-body connection has health impacts. And so we were chatting, and I was like, why don't we make these into actual mosaics? Oh, and I've missed a really important part of this project, is that every single artwork in the biennial was new, and every single artwork had to be collaborative with someone else. So there was no single authored artwork. Everything had to be made in Uzbekistan with Uzbek people, and the Uzbek people had to be equally credited. There was also the rule that it could not be someone telling an Uzbek person what to do. The Uzbek person had to have their own creative approach that would inform and change how the artist worked. All the artists got paid the same fee, and we tried to basically infrastructurally, like in my opening speech, I said, like, a biennial cannot heal the heartbreaks of the world. That's impossible. But we can maybe try to infrastructurally heal some inequities within our own system. So here, Oyjon worked with Rahmon and Raufal Toyrov to create these monumental mosaics of organs that you could find all across the biennial. And she kind of became like the biggest hit of the biennial. She's getting invited to different biennials now. She just got a residency in Paris. So this is, again, totally going to change her life, but through the quality of the work. So you don't have to go to a great art school. I really believe in the power of an artwork to move outside of the kind of CV things that we think are necessary to be successful. This is another work I absolutely love by an artist duo, Himali Singh Soin and David Soin Tapisar. Their collective name is Hylozoic Desires. And so they worked with silk weavers from an area called Margilan to weave a 3-kilometer long banner of satellite images of the evaporating Aral Sea. So the Aral Sea was the 4th largest inland lake, and it's almost all evaporated due to the cotton industry. So during the Soviet Union, they grew a lot of cotton in Uzbekistan and dried out the water, and this has created a massive ecological problem. So basically, these banners are a timeline. So you're looking from 1960 until 2024, and you kind of watch this area get more and more salty and dried up. But these banners were hung along the canal. So as you walked, you could actually see that relationship between the low levels of water and the waters of the satellite map. And importantly, so all these works were outside for 10 weeks in blazing hot sun. So the artists actually envisioned this, that the sun would bleach out the top because it's part of the concept of the artwork. So all of the artists knew that they were making work for the climate conditions of Bukhara from September 5th to November 20th. It was not something where we were trying to fight the sun. We were working with the sun as a collaborator. I love puppets, and I understand people in Santa Fe love puppets too, so I'm very excited to see some of the puppet works here. But this is a work by a Bangladeshi artist named Kamruzaman Shadeen, and I've worked with him in Dhaka for many, many times, for 15 years. And so Bangladesh had a revolution in 2024, and it's very, very hard for Bangladeshis to get visas anywhere, including to Uzbekistan. So he was heartbroken because he couldn't get a visa. And so I was like, okay, he works with puppet theaters in Bangladesh. Let's try to do on Skype, or not Skype anymore, Zoom, a digital or a virtual collaboration with the puppet makers. And the idea was to make these vehicles of the miraculous. So within South Asian stories, there's stories that Sufis traveled from Central Asia on the back of crocodiles, on the back of fish. There are all these crazy vehicles of the miraculous. So he imagined that these vehicles could let people travel in a time where mobility is cut. Luckily, I was able to get him a visa, and he came later. And Kamruzaman is a bit of a megalomaniac. I say that with a lot of love. But the way that he imagined these puppets were way too heavy for any puppet maker to move. So the collaborators ended up being the Uzbek military, because they were the only people that could carry something that heavy. So these puppets would be paraded throughout the streets. But I think that's also a very beautiful gesture in these current times, especially with Russia as a neighbor, having puppets being carried by the military. But also in that sense of generosity, Kamruzaman wanted the puppet maker to show the dexterity and the beautiful movements of the puppets. So in the end of the biennial, the puppet shrank down to puppet size and became a beautiful play. So we transformed this beautiful madrasa into a puppet theater. So I'll just show a couple other images. I also, there is a deep relationship between craft and technology, which is not always apparent. So I didn't want this to feel like an arts and crafts show. So we also did a lot of projects that were looking at that relationship between technology and craft. This is a beautiful work. So this image circulated kind of all over the place this year. It's a collaboration between a Brazilian painter named Marina Perez Simal and a master ceramicist named Bakhtior, who mostly restores mosaics in Samarkand. So he doesn't make new mosaics, he copies things from the 17th century. And this was actually the first work I could envision when I came into the site. Marina's a very close friend of mine. This is a caravanserai. So basically this is where people from all over the world would come. Their donkeys would be parked in there. Those little niches are where they would eat their food. And so Uzbekistan is also very famous for astronomy and making astronomical instruments. And so we wanted to envision something where like the sky collapsed onto the floor. So I'm going to play a video. So you'll actually see here how these collaborations worked. There's sound also. Can we have sound, please? Oops. Maybe we need to turn it up. Sound, please. It worked earlier. No? It worked in the test. Anyway, what you're seeing here is how Bakhtior and Marina were working and how they transformed how the other worked. Because Marina didn't have these ideas of colors. The idea of adding gold to reflect the sun came from Bakhtior. They had different ideas of what black holes looked like, what multiple moons looked like. But here you can see how the piece looked. It also became a platform for performances, for talks. It was a space to really be animated by different people. The show was also made in a way that you were meant to see the sites both in the day and in the night because it was a completely different experience. So anyway, this was a very, very beautiful work. Marina mostly makes works that sell extremely well at auction, and she as an artist is really tired of just making canvas-based works that circulate in the market. So this is not our first project together. We try to put the work into architecture in new forms, and I think this was a very, very beautiful and successful collaboration. This is a piece by a young Uzbek artist named Z, which is paired with a work by Wael Shaki, who's normally in this room, that's on the gate of the caravanserai. I know time is moving up, so I'll just show you a little bit. But this also comes from the Dhaka experience. I didn't want to kind of build walls and transform spaces. This space is a ruin, and I wanted to use the ruin in its own way. So this hole was seen kind of as a problem, and it was the collapsed basement of the caravanserai. But when I walked down in the hole, it actually reminded me of a 70s conversation pit. So I worked with the artist, and here, like as you see, we basically made this incredible kind of 70s conversation pit where all these elements, the piece is about homesickness, and she was remembering elements from her childhood home, turned them into these pillows, and then started interviewing people from the Jewish diaspora from Bukhara, because Bukhara used to have a really large Jewish community, and now most of them live in Brooklyn. So she was also like, what are the patterns of homesickness that they have? And it became this beautiful collaborative project that actually was mostly full of kids all the time. So we kind of took it over as adults here. We had a competition with art historians to make different towers. So that's what's happening in this video from my phone. I'm gonna just slide. So the other thing I'm super proud about was trying to collapse this idea between who is an artist and who is an artisan. So this is Abdul Wahid Bukhari. If I'm not mistaken, he's someone that probably showed in the international folk market here. He is an incredible ceramicist who received a UNESCO grant to revive the blue glaze of Samarkand. So during the Soviet era, the mass-produced ceramics massively negatively impacted ceramic production in Uzbekistan. And so he actually was able to revive this, this technique, but he made this room called Blue Room, which is looking at water healing motifs that existed in Uzbekistan. And everyone who walked in this room, their jaw just dropped. And here you can't tell me that there's a divide between like who is an artisan that's showing in an international folk market and who's an artist showing in a museum. Like this was a really beautiful example of how you could collapse those sometimes unnecessary categories that people are ascribed to. He's Bukharian, and again, this project, he's now having lots and lots of opportunities all over the world. This is Delcy Morelos. So I also wanted to make a show that people couldn't see through the phone. So this is a work where she was creating scent with a 4th-generation spice merchant. So this turmeric mountain was also filled with cinnamon and different spices. So you basically had this incredible olfactory experience when inside. So when you walk through, this is a collapsed mosque from the 16th century. You'll see some more pictures later. So you walk into the mosque, you don't know where you're going, and you come out and you see this beautiful yellow pyramid. There you have an incredible, now a friend, monk chef named Jung Kwan. So she's a Buddhist monk and chef. You should watch her series on the chef's table. It's really incredible. But she works with food as a spiritual practice. So a lot of artists in the show, because Bukhara is a spiritual center, they treat art as part of spirituality, which is also important for a mosque site. So this is a work, this is Anthony Gormley's work for the Bukhara Biennial. And he actually, all this is mud from the site, or dirt from the site, nothing, no mud moved from outside, sun, straw, and a recipe that comes from an ancient Central Asian architecture techniques, which came from Timur. And so basically, over time, they created over 100 figures. So each of these figures is unique in a different pose, and it's a labyrinth with which people walked through. Here you see what that looked like in the full moon. So I also collaborated with lunar cycles. So we open during a full moon and an eclipse because the lighting impacts how you see the artworks. So this is how you see how Delsey's work, Antony's work, that I don't have time to talk through all the works on the site, kind of coexisted in a beautiful space. This, as I close, so I also really love to give big space and big opportunities to young women. And this is a work called 1,000 Prayers. So this is all women's headscarves that were taken from women, or women gave them in Bukhara, that were tied together into this form to make this beautiful dragon that's levitating over the site. It's also inspired by Buddhist prayer flags. So imagine when the wind blows, these flags are blowing, and the kind of shadows that this makes. It's also kind of amazing that this is flying over Antony's work, and he also loves this work. But the works were not static. So what was really beautiful at the end of the exhibition is that the dragon moved. So the dragon moved, and this is in front of the oldest mosque in Central Asia called the Magokia Tori, which was actually was originally a fire temple, which became a mosque, which then was used as a synagogue on Fridays when it was still a mosque, and then became a carpet museum during the Soviet Union. So it's a place that's very, very spiritually charged, but a space for all different where all different traditions can coexist. So women came and they started taking the scarves apart while singing, and in the end, all that was left was the kind of metal carcass, and that's what closed the show. These are just a couple other pictures. I opened a restaurant, so that was also interesting. So we had a restaurant where we had 12 different chefs from all over the world interpret food and healing from different perspectives. And this was something, I don't have time to go into it, but it was a really, a lot of institutions license out their restaurants, which I understand, like running a business is difficult, but you can actually use food as a vehicle of learning. Like the minute you tell someone that all chili peppers come from the Americas, the way they see the world entirely changes. How much more time do I have? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is rice cultures. This is rice from Senegal. So we were really trying to, make these different connections. So I don't only do festivals, I also build permanent infrastructure. So this is our beautiful residency space in the northeast of Bangladesh. It's designed by an architect named Kashif Mahbub Chowdhury. So he's a local Bangladeshi architect. He's won an Aga Khan Prize. He also won a prize for the best building of the year, I think in 2023, the Reba Prize, because he's building for climate disaster. So he's building, you know that Bangladesh is going to flood, so he's building for that rather than trying to fight that. And so this is all made out of handmade bricks. This is our gallery, so you see how the bricks are undulating in the landscape like a sculpture. This is our residency site, so we have 11 apartments where artists can live and work in the landscape. And here we're also producing artworks and videos and films here. This is a beautiful film by an Albanian artist named Driant Zanelli, and he imagined a fairy tale of a white peacock that's negotiated. Bangladesh has 6 seasons, not 4. So instead of Vivaldi's 4 seasons, he's imagining a 6th season, and you have this Baroque singer. His costume of the white peacock it's like an umbrella. It opens, it closes, and it has all of these robotics, and it's a climate fable. Here you can see like a shot from the top. We also worked with painters to make the different backgrounds. It was raining at the time, so you see how the reflection is moving on the floor. It's a very beautiful film, which you might see touring in different museums all over the world. And then I guess for what's coming next with the next Dhaka Art Summit, we had an incident in the 2023 Dhaka Art Summit where a young person had his heart broken. So it's unclear to me whether the woman in question was his girlfriend, someone he was stalking, an imaginary figure. It doesn't really matter. But in the Art Anthony McCall room, suddenly we saw that like the name Tondra was written on the wall. And we started looking all over the exhibition space, and there were all these poems written to this woman named Tondra. And basically it says things like, I came here to forget you, but Tondra, your thoughts are haunting me. And actually some of the poems were quite beautiful. Like, here's a crate of Pol Tabouret. So actually this got stopped by customs. This says, so there's a poem there. This is like the outside of the venue. We still keep finding these messages to Tondra. So we found this young man, talked to him, tried to help him as much as we could. But we thought something that's really interesting is, in a way, this person was using the most like public platform to try to deal creatively with their inner feelings. And what's interesting about Tondra in Bengali means the space between being asleep and being awake. It's like this kind of liminal space. And also, there was an author in the 90s who wrote about a character named Tondra, and suddenly that character became someone everyone wanted to be, and so there's lots of people named Tondra. So even like my assistant curator, Ruxmini, her first like email account was like, Tondra1995@gmail.com or something like that. So Tondra is a figure that migrated from fiction into reality. So we decided that the theme of the next summit would be Tondra, and we would try to look at this like space that's possible with liminal dreaming. Unfortunately, it is not safe to do a summit in Bangladesh right now. But we need to support artists. So we decided to take this Tondra idea a step further, because even when you're dreaming, even if you can't move, ideas can move. So we're working on 10 commissions with Bangladeshi artists, working with 5 international curators, and my team, we're supporting them. But to develop artworks that are basically scores where no one needs to travel and nothing needs to ship, so that if everything's stuck, these ideas can still circulate. So at the end of 2026, will be museums all over the world showing these different Tondra works. So kind of distributed out to Dhaka Art Summit. And whenever it's safe, these works will then become the kind of anchor point to imagine what a summit will look like in a different country, basically, because the whole political reality has changed. So anyway, with that, thank you so much for listening. It was a lot, but you've been a great audience. Thank you so much.
You might have addressed this, so I apologize if you did, but how were the artists and the makers paired?
Oh, that's a very good question. So it worked in different ways. So I also should say that this is much more than a 2-year show, because the organization that commissioned me, the Arts and Culture Development Foundation of Uzbekistan, they've been doing research on artisans for 8 years. So they know a lot of these people already. They've already worked with these people, because if you suddenly call someone, like for example, there was a yurt maker in Karkal, Pakistan that collaborated on one of the projects. Don't speak English, don't travel so much to big cities. Unless they had had this relationship, if we had made that call, that would have been really crazy. So people were kind of already aware that this foundation was working with artisans in an interesting way. And then also the artisans, this is what I love about the Uzbek scene. Every artisan we met started introducing us to their friends. So like it kind of spiraled like that. So basically artists would come on a site visit, they would look at a bunch of things and they would say, oh, this kind of craft interests me. And then we would go meet different artisans that make that kind of craft and try to see like who is interested in pushing their practice forward in a different way. And also who wants to have that kind of engagement. Some people don't want that, right? So I was giving an example earlier where there was a certain artisan that didn't want to embroider demon forms because she thought it was, they're not demons. She saw them as demons, but because it was against her religion. So wrong pairing, but there was someone else that was a right pairing. And I would say actually in every single case, the pairings were great. There were moments of friction, of course, so we would all ask, is this really a collaboration? And sometimes we'd have to go, this doesn't seem like a collaboration. You're telling this person what to do. Where is their input? And in the end, we're really happy with it. But it's because I would not be able to replicate this project somewhere in a 2-year timeline, because the networks of artisans would have to have already been set. So for Dhaka, that took 10 years to build up, where all of those artisans were, or in the Philippines, they live in the site. So it's, and also working with artisans is really complicated. Not everyone wants to do that. Think about all the mistakes, the timelines, like the people in Margilan that made Himali and David's work. Like the internet goes out all the time. Sometimes the roads close because it's iced out. Like it's not it's not for the faint of heart. You need people that know how to do that. And big language gaps as well. But the great thing is that there's a hand knowledge. Like, so that's something that Anthony Gormley said, is that he loved learning about a place by making things with people. So that I think was really great.
So you mentioned your mother came from Guam and you spent a lot of time there. And now you've spoken fantastically about these other places. Do you have any hopes and thoughts about Guam itself and your mother's culture? And if so, could you tell us a little bit?
Sure, that's a big but very important question. Yes, so I want to take all of these tools that I learned all over the world and do something there, but it's very complicated, especially with the U.S. military buildup right now. So I just took Marina Tabassum, who is my favorite architect. She's if you don't know her work, look her up. She just did the Serpentine Pavilion in London. She's won 2 Aga Khan prizes for architecture, and this amazing woman is building $500 homes that move when it floods. So she's also this kind of person that, don't tell me that you don't have money. Like, creativity can do something to change the world. And she is just incredible. So I took her with me to Guam. And what was amazing, this just happened like a month ago. And she was looking around, she's like, wow, I really feel like I am in a history book about colonization in Bangladesh, because Guam is one of the it's just one of the places that's technically one of the 17 colonies left in the world. All the materials are coming from off the island. Everything has to be concrete. You want building permits, you need to, or insurance, you need to build in concrete. And then I went next door to Yap and Palau that don't have American presence like that, and they're still building with their own local techniques. So I want to do something that's actually bridging these islands together, because they were connected. And our idea is actually to work with boat builders. Like, so the people that were taking these canoes, so if you ever watch Moana, like, the people taking those canoes, they're actually building to be out in the open sea for, in really difficult climate environments. So, and if you're building a boat, you need different permits than building a house. So kind of taking the lessons of the $500 house, but working with boat makers and kind of creating spaces that people can use for culture or for schools or for education. But yeah, complicated, but very excited about it.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.